I'm Ryan Grimm, and I'm joined here by Farron Cousins. Farron is down in Florida, and we're going to talk a bit about Senate races across the country, but particularly about the presidential election first. Farron, what are you seeing down there in terms of enthusiasm for Donald Trump on the ground? And I'll follow up with why I'm asking about this, but the polls out there have Joe Biden surging all over the place, but there are some other numbers out there that are a little bit less optimism inducing for Democrats. What are you seeing down in Florida?
What we're seeing when you kind of look, a little bit past the poll numbers is actually kind of terrifying down here in Florida. The latest numbers out show that Democrats do have an edge right now among registered voters, but that edge is only about 100,000 voters. Now, back in 2016, there was about a 300,000 gap with the Democrats having that advantage. So they've fallen by roughly 200,000 voters. The Republicans have made up that much ground in just the last 4 years, which is shocking considering the fact we have had a lot of outside groups come and spend money down here in Florida. We've got former felons, those that don't owe the fines and aren't subject to the poll tax. They are being registered, but it still isn't quite enough to really, make Florida, go blue for good. This is still very much a swing state, and I know the polls, especially with the elderly voters, they're showing great things for Biden. The other numbers aren't looking as clear right now. It is very muddy. And so election night is probably when we're going to have a better picture, not even a finished picture, but a better picture of where Florida's going to go. But Trump doesn't really have too much of a path to the White House without Florida. Biden doing so well in the other swing states right now is good for him. He, can do this without Florida. I don't know that Trump can.
Right, and you're seeing similar numbers in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin as well when it comes to these voter registration numbers, and particularly, when they zero in on these what they call white non-college over 30, people who are over the age of 30 years old who don't have a college degree are registering to vote at a clip that is much higher than any other demographic. And it's not enough to kind of overcome the polls, but what makes Democrats nervous, I've heard, is that it might signal that there is enthusiasm among that group that Trump has been able to engender with his 4-year theatrical performance that he's been putting on for them. Because people think that if everybody votes in every state that Democrats are going to win, but actually in states like Florida, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, there's this bottomless well of these white voters in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and above who don't have college degrees, who haven't voted before but are eligible to vote. And if you can trigger them, that's kind of a path back for Trump. So are you seeing evidence compared to 2016 that there is more excitement on the ground for Trump among that demographic?
Well, it's really interesting because I think what we have here is what they've been calling in the polls the shy voters, because, well, I got to take back a little bit. Back in 2004, in 2008 with McCain, Palin, in 2012 with Romney, Ryan, you saw those yard signs, you saw those bumper stickers all over the place. It was everywhere. You do not, and I'm in Northwest Florida, super red area. Matt Gaetz is our congressman. It's Republican land. They haven't voted for a Democrat since 1960. So to not see that everywhere, to see more signs for Phil Ayer, who is running against Matt Gaetz, to see as many Biden-Harris signs is good. But the people who have nothing out there, it's pretty much well assumed these are Trump voters, these are Trump supporters, but they're a little embarrassed by it. The enthusiasm is there, it truly is. They just don't like to show it because even here in this red part of Florida, there is a stigma attached to it. It is this thing that you don't want to have associated with you for most people, or some people, I should say, not even most, but for some of them. So we are seeing the shy voters, and I think that's why some people can get lulled into the sense of, oh man, Biden's got it down here. Really not. I mean, it's not as clear cut as it seems. So the enthusiasm certainly exists, but I think a lot of it exists behind closed doors right now.
And tell me if I'm right about this, but you talked earlier about how Democrats, went from a 300,000 or 400,000 voter registration advantage down to 100,000. My understanding is that a lot of those people are legacy Democrats, people who were Democrats back in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and have been voting Republican basically since the 70s, but just simply haven't re-registered. And for some reason, they kind of culturally consider themselves Democrats or just haven't bothered to do the paperwork, but are for all intents and purposes Republicans. And so the fact that they have an advantage on paper should not actually be seen as like a real advantage. Is that right, or is that just kind of something that people say about Florida?
No, it really is. You do have a lot of, well, I used to be a Democrat back then, but I lean more conservative now. And a lot of it does have to do with, the population aging. I mean, there've been plenty of studies that show that, yeah, as people age, they do tend to get more conservative, in general. There's obviously exceptions to that, but that's what happens. And they don't need to change it. They don't need to vote in the primary because we have closed primaries, or at least that's their mentality. I don't need to go to the primary. Whoever gets it, that's who I'm gonna vote for. I don't really care. They're all interchangeable. So they don't change it and they stay a Democrat. They vote as a Republican. So there is plenty of that, and that's certainly gonna, rear its ugly head on election day. So it's gonna be really interesting, hopefully interesting in a good way, and not interesting in a way that makes us all want to bang our head against the wall when this is the returns are coming.
Right. And so in Arizona, in the Senate race out there, where Mark Kelly is taking on Martha McSally, he's doing extremely well among old voters. Joe Biden in Arizona is doing very well among older voters. Joe Biden's doing fairly okay in Florida among older voters, but not remotely as well as he is in Arizona. Why? What's your take on what the difference is between? I have my own theory, but I want to hear yours since you live down there. Why are the old folks in Florida different than the old folks in Arizona?
We have, not to say Arizona doesn't have a diverse population, but we have a big amalgam, especially down in South and Central Florida, of people who are not necessarily native Floridians, native Southerners. So we get, New York Republicans that retire down here, New Jersey Republicans, and we do have a large, Cuban population that has come here. And those are the ones that they always try to scare with socialism. That's why that plays so well here, because these are people who went through, very hard living circumstances for a considerable amount of time. And when they're told by these new, leaders in this new country that, hey, they're gonna put you right back into that, they don't exactly have a way of knowing how American politics work. They've been here long enough, yeah, they do, but that plays well. The socialism scare plays well with them. And it plays well with the elderly population to a degree as well. So the difference in, I guess I would say, the kind of people that move to Florida versus the kind that are in Arizona, that could be why there's such a discrepancy. That's just one theory I have. So I am interested in what you.
No, that's half of my theory. The other half is that Arizona is really a retirement community largely for Californians, and so you get much more liberal people moving down there, and some from the Midwest and Colorado, but largely it's Californians who head down there to retire. Whereas, like you said, you're exactly right. New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, even Ohio, even into the Midwest. So a lot of conservative people coming from the Northeast down to Florida. Right. Yeah. Exactly. And so they bring their politics down with them. So, looking at the landscape now, if you had to make a call, how do you think how do you think people are going to be feeling about Florida on election night and then a couple days after?
I'm hoping that we don't screw it up for everybody, but I really do think we could be looking at another situation like 2000. I don't know that it's going to be, to the Supreme Court as bad with just Florida. But I do think what really happens in Florida is going to play out over a week or so. But I would love to be optimistic, but in the area I am in Florida, it's very difficult to be optimistic about this.
Sure thing. And Farron Cousins, thanks so much for joining us here on The Conversation. Talk to you soon.
Thanks.
On the go? Don't worry, we got you covered. You can still listen to TYT at our new podcast network. Find us on Apple Podcasts, the Google Play Store, or at tyt.com/podcast.